So our next speaker is Geneviève Darel, who is an MSc student from the Transatlantic Forestry Master's Program at the University of Alberta. She is her supervisor is Dr. Andreas Hamann, so many of you may know Andreas. Geneviève's got a background in data science and modeling, and she aims to apply her quantitative approaches to forest management. Her talk today is titled Climate-Based Species Choice and Seed Sourcing for the Diverse Project Forest Management Areas. Welcome, Geneviève, to the stage. There we go. Thank you, Geneviève.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to my talk today. We were tasked with providing recommendations for what species to plant in all of the diverse forest management areas' new climates. And so we provided species recommendations and new seed sourcing recommendations for the changing climate. And this has to be done because current seed transfer systems assume a constant climate, something we can no longer count on. So this is probably a figure that's familiar to a lot of people, or at least anyone in this space. This was made by Greg O'Neill, and this is supposed to represent a seed zone. And it indicates that you can transfer seeds within the seed zone, but not between different zones. So we've taken a similar approach to British Columbia, and we've taken this polygon seed delineation transfer, and we've updated it so that you can transfer seeds for the changing climate. So essentially you communicate seed transfer by saying you can transfer seeds from this polygon to this polygon. Now, how do we calculate what seeds will be adapted to the new climate? Well, first, we expanded all of this to North America, and that resulted in the 2,000 plus ecosystems shown here on the right. And then we compared the 1960s climate, which we used as a proxy for the historic climate that all of the trees are adapted to. And we compared this historic climate proxy to the future climates of all of the ecosystems. And the 1990s, which is interpolated weather station data. So, for example, looking at this ecosystem here, we want to get a planting source for the 2020s. We compare all of the historic 1960s climates to this planting site's new projected 2020s climate. And then we find the historic climate that's the closest match. And you can actually take this approach and you can use the species that are currently growing in the seed sources to imply species recommendations. So now that we've gone over the methods very briefly, we can get to the exciting part, the results. So on the left here is a map of all of the ecosystems in North America, color-coded by their major biome. And then on the right here is a map of all of the ecosystems in North America, color-coded by the percent of forested area. And these are based on the top climate matches for all of the climate periods. And you can go through these different matches and color them by the climate matches. And you can see how the new climates historically were populated. So if you can click on this link here to go back one more time. There are a few things I want to point out when we go through this general overview of the climate matching behind the recommendations. So I want to point out that this prairie biome here in central North America is not a forested biome, and it does, that climate does migrate north into Alberta and Saskatchewan. And then the other thing I want to point out is this lime green climate of the northeastern mixedwood forest. There are some long distance climate matches for this. And as you look at the future climate periods, you'll see the 1990s, which is actual observed climate change from weather station data. You do see that prairie climate migrating north already. And then the 2020s, our current climate, it migrates north. And then in the 2050s, you see that long distance climate match here. It does affect some of the species recommendations in Alberta. And if any of the forest management managers have any questions about that, we can go over that afterwards. And then into the 2080s, you see everything shifts up and it becomes more extreme. So that's a broad overview of the climate matches behind our recommendations. But let's take a closer look at how this shifting prairie biome affects the forest management areas. So this graph here, every single line represents a forest management area, and they're color-coded west to east in a color gradient. And on the left here, the y-axis is the percent forest cover of the climate matches for all of the climate periods we looked at. And for majority of them, there are forested climate matches in the future climate periods. However, there are not forested climate matches for Peace River and Porcupine. So let's take a closer look at Peace River and what this can mean when you're looking at it at the forest management area level. So the first thing you're going to want to look at is this. And again, you see that non-forested climate match right here, which is really that prairie biome to the south. However, another thing that you will notice is agriculture. The land use of the climate matches in the 2050s and 2080s has a lot more agriculture in it. We did control for human-caused deforestation, so that should not be affecting the non-forested area and the species frequencies. However, it can indicate another possible land use. In the case of Peace River, it's probably rangeland for cattle. And then it's not all bad news for Peace River. Quaking aspen does have a future in this forest management area under climate change. However, assisted migration of quaking aspen is probably complicated because usually it's root suckering. It's not really commonly planted. So that would be something to experiment with. And then I also want to take a moment to talk about black spruce. So I've been showing you all these maps and these shifting climates. However, real world shifts in ecosystems is dependent on a lot of other things besides just climate data. And this black spruce is a really great example of that. So if you look at it, it's historically the second most common species in this forest management area based on the satellite data. However, even by the 1990s, a period that's already passed based on real climate data, it's only 3.3% present in the 1990s climate matches. So I think anyone who works this forest management area will say we have not lost all the black spruce already. And I've looked at satellite data since then, and it is still there. So what this really means is that if this climate persists over a long period, likely that black spruce would not continue to be there. However, black spruce is a great example about how other factors can influence tree species ability to adapt to climate or persist. So it grows in wet areas, and it takes a while for those wet areas to dry out. So realistically, it could be buffered from climate change. And again, these are recommendations of what to plant. They are not recommendations of what will happen in the real world in this time frame. And then lastly, for all of the other species, you do see that same trend. They are not present in the future climate matches because it's not really climate matching to a forested biome. So now we're going to look at the diversity. Again, each of these lines represents one of the diverse forest management areas. And you'll see that Peace River and Porcupine do not have a ton of diversity going on due to the lack of forested climate matches. However, for the majority of the forest management areas, you do see a bit of an increase in diversity. And I do want to clarify this is tree species diversity only. However, there are two forest management areas that look a little bit funky as well, and that's Grand Prairie and Blue Ridge. They sort of have this big jump at the end in species diversity, and that's due to those long distance climate matches to the East Coast. However, from an experimental perspective, that is the closest climate match, and we are not the only scientists to find this result for this time period. Other scientists that use more granular, more complex models have also found this long distance climate match. So it is the closest climate match for that period, and what we do experimentally with that is something I think we'll have to debate. I do want to point out some of the climate matches for the long distance ones. The actual climate match itself is not particularly close, which even further complicates what actual experiments we want to do with those sites. We've gone over everything at a continental scale, and then we've gone down to the forest management area scale. Now we're going to go to the ecosystem scale because we actually provided the recommendations for all of the ecosystems within the forest management areas, and that's represented by all of these dots here. So we developed an online tool to communicate these recommendations because there's a lot of information to convey. And the first step is choosing an ecosystem. So to do that, you can use the map like we're doing here in this demo, or you can use these tabs up above. For this talk, we're going to look at the Algonquin Eco District in the Halliburton Forest Management Area because it's close to Ottawa. And the first thing you will see will be this graph here. So let's take a closer look at it. So this is a graph of the mean annual precipitation over the mean annual temperature. We used more climate variables than just those two to compare the climates, but those are some of the two most important variables. So they're the ones we show in the tool. And the main purpose of this graph is to compare these two climates, which are based on climate normals, so actual real weather station data, and these black dots here, which are weather station decadal averages. And you can see a big warming in the 2020s, which is a partial decadal average. Obviously, we're not to the 2030s yet. And so you want to compare that with these 3 points, which are future climate projections. So you want to make sure actual observed climate change is in line with future climate change. And if for whatever reason your site is warming sooner, you can also use the 2050 sooner, et cetera, to adapt for increasingly warming climate. In this case, they are aligned. So the tool is a good fit for seed sourcing and species source for this example, Eco District. And then the next step is this here, which is the species data. So this is the species frequencies of the climate matches for all of the climate periods we looked at. For our example, Eco District, Algonquin, and Halliburton. And the first thing to look at is the non-forested area, which remains relatively constant. So that means you have forested climate matches to choose from. One thing to keep in mind is as agriculture does increase, which also can include human development, which can be an issue if all of your seed sources are developed. But again, that should not affect your forested area or your species frequencies. So now we get to the exciting part. What species should we look into? For this example one, sugar maple and red maple are good examples of species to continue planting, but source a more climate adapted seed source as climate change intensifies because they maintain their prevalence throughout the different climate periods. So that means they would be a good candidate for population-assisted migration or trying different variants. There are some species at this planting site that are not present in the future climate matches, paper birch and balsam fir. This is not particularly surprising. These are more boreal species, and this forest management area is at the edge of the boreal biome. And from a management perspective, it would probably be best to not continue planting them because the seedling phase is a very vulnerable phase of the seedling's life cycle, of the tree's life cycle. And if it's used for timber harvest, you could prioritize the harvest of these species before mortality increases. Oh, I pressed the wrong one. And then there are some species that are not currently particularly present that are present in the climate matches that could be interesting to experiment with. Black cherry, white oak, and green ash. So now that we've looked at the climate data and the species we're interested in, it is time to use the tool to select a seed source. So to do that, you are going to scroll down like this. You'll see this map here. All of these dots represent the top 10 climate matches for all of the different time periods that we looked at. And the time periods are represented on the left here by these sliders. And so to choose climate matches that are closely matched to the 2020s, what you would do is you would go to this slider here and you draw it. You would draw it down like this. And what you will see here is these numbers above the slider represent the climactic distance. We used a normalized scaled Euclidean climactic distance to compare climates. But without getting into that too much, the smaller the distance, the closer the climates. And in our scaled climate variables, a distance of 0.5 is a good climate match, whereas a distance of 1 approaches no analog. So what I've done here is I've chosen a good climate match for the 2020s. So all of these seed zones that are left are good climate matches for the 2020s. However, trees live longer than just a 30-year climate normal period. So let's get a good climate match for the 2050s and 2080s as well. And that is again by decreasing those sliders. And you really want to pay attention to the numbers at the top because that indicates how good the climate match is, not the distance of the sliders. And then we're left with this one, which is a decent climate match for all of the future climate periods. So certainly a seed source worth testing out. If you're paying attention in the methods section, you will have noticed we actually make calculations for all of North America, and we have species data to provide species recommendations for all of Canada. So that means we actually have enough data to provide a much more comprehensive tool, which we have developed already, and the SIS Lab is working on a 2.0 version as well. In conclusion, you need to remember the main thing is that this is based on climate matching alone. It's not looking at site variables. So we started out at the continental scale. We went to the forest management area scale, and then we went to the ecosystem scale. But there's really a fourth scale when using this tool, and that's the planting site scale. So like any other seed recommendation tool, the forester needs to look at the planting site and decide what to plant. However, there is an added risk of using novel species, et cetera, and that's why the experiments that the diverse team is planning are so important for testing this methodology and the species interactions, et cetera. So we're really excited to see possibly the results from the 2050s climate matches, possibly by the 2050s, when assisted migration operationalization will probably no longer be optional. And the tool allows people to experiment with the 2080s. So I want to take a moment to thank the Diverse Project and all of my friends and my supervisor and Nick as well. He was pretty involved in this project as well. This was such a cool project to work on for my master's thesis. And I'm excited to see the results of the experiments. So here is the link to the two tools I mentioned. This is a diverse specific tool. This is the North American tool. Questions and comments welcome.
Thank you very much, Geneviève. Any questions? There we go.
Thanks for a great talk. I really like all the graphics. The tool doesn't convey much information about uncertainty, and so I was wondering if you could. I understand why, but I was wondering if you have an idea of like the amount of uncertainty that you have in those climate matching that you're doing.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So we do not quantify the uncertainty of the climate data geographically, which could be useful if you were comparing planting sites. But when it comes to your specific site, that is going to be the closest climate match in North America for your site. So because we used all the ecosystems in North America, you'll know that that's the closest climate match. And then if you want to look at the quality of the climate match, you're going to look at that Euclidean climactic distance number, which comes back to the climate matching results. However, we don't really do additional work to quantify a no climate analog match. So that's something we're maybe thinking about adding in the future. But because we included all the ecosystems, it is still the closest climate match in North America. So it's, yeah.
I had in mind also the uncertainty about the climate projections, which are known to be very large.
Yes. Yeah, so not the regional geographic, but the climate change projection uncertainty. Yeah, no.
But I know you can't do everything, right?
Looks like we have one more question, Peter. Oh.
Not really a question, just plugging that we also have a poster which will have a live demo of the tools during the poster session. And I guess just to add on to the question about uncertainty climactically, I think early on in production, we did look at the different SSPs and did a bit of a comparison, and we ended up going with a middle of the road model to base our climate on. But definitely, especially the further out you go, so for the 2050s, it's pretty stable. But the further out you go, there's more and more uncertainty between the models. So that might be something to think about when you're using the tool. If you're, looking at a 2020s climate or even a 2050s climate, it might be pretty stable. But the further out you go, there's more uncertainty in the predictions.
It's sort of a trade-off between usability and readability and information too, so.
And because it's you, Peter, we'll take your question.
A great talk and a great project. A quick question, if I have time, a quick comment. You said you use other variables other than mean annual temperature, mean annual precipitation. I'm curious what they are and where the project hopes to go in the future, because the anticipation is that rainfall is going to get ever more patchy. So more and more of the rain will fall in fewer events earlier in the year, and the same mean annual precipitation won't necessarily have the same impacts on soil moisture throughout the growing season or on VPD. And so are there attempts to try to take a more granular look at those elements of climate matching?
I think going more granular is maybe better to do planting site by planting site instead of at the ecosystem level, because if you go that granular, then you're recommending like to source seeds from like a very small area, which is not operationally super feasible. So there's like sort of a trade-off between that additional planting site analysis versus recommending seeds at a larger scale. But here are the variables we used a lot. And we actually did add elevation as well, which is not a climate variable, just to encourage seed transfer along elevation gradients versus upwards in elevation where those transfers can be riskier. But no, it's a good point.
And my comment, you brought it up then about seed sourcing, is that unfortunately, both in Canada and the United States, our seed availability sources are shambolic, to be blunt. The availability of getting seeds from where you want it from is near zero in many, many cases. And so that's an issue for the field in general, not for your project.
And across border stuff is complicated, I know.
So once again, Geneviève, thank you so much.